Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. In this podcast, I want to play for you a recording of a discipleship lesson I gave for the people at First Methodist Church, Houston. I hope you enjoy. Today's discipleship lesson comes from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 through 7. Today, particularly, I want to look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 to 26. Matthew 5, 21 to 26. And we're going to talk about what we do with anger, and especially what we do when we call someone else to be angry. And that's the key part of these texts. Now remember that in Matthew so far, in the first 4 chapters of Matthew, Jesus is identified as the Son of God, and that's been firmly established. His royal pedigree has been established in his genealogy. His divine office has been established by his baptism and temptations. And then in the next few chapters, his authority over evil and sickness is emphasized. But then Matthew chapters 5 through 7, he shifts gears a little bit to emphasize Jesus as the one who teaches God's will and his righteousness. In Matthew 5 through 7, overall, which Augustine was probably the first to call the Sermon on the Mount, emphasize what a disciple of Jesus should be and how a disciple of Jesus should behave. What a disciple should be and how a disciple should behave. And I think that's two good key themes to keep in mind when you read Matthew 5 through 7. Maybe all the Gospels, but certainly Matthew 5 through 7. This particular text is something really important. In verse 17, I know I said 21 to 26, but in verse 17, Jesus says, "Don't think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them." So Jesus tells his people, don't think I'm here to say that's all rubbish and nonsense. In fact, I've come to fulfill. Now, that's a very debated verse. It's debated because the word for fulfill can mean a whole host of things. It could mean I bring an end to it. It could mean I surpass it, I fulfill it, I bring it to completion, a whole host of things. And it's difficult to demonstrate if scholars have a consensus view on what he means by that. Like verse 18, I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. That same word, fulfilled and accomplished or brought to an end. Jesus seems to mean, in my view, in reading a lot of scholars and in my own reading and thinking about as well, it seems to be the case that Jesus thinks that he is bringing the true intent of the law to the people. There are times where Jesus seems to go completely against the law, but in general it seems like he's not going completely against it, but he is fulfilling it. He's saying, here's exactly how it should be understood, here's how it should be interpreted. And when you put that in a first century context, where you have many Jewish teachers who teach a lot of interpretations, and they should, Jesus is saying, in essence, implying, their teachings are false, unless they agree with me, but here's exactly the true meaning, here's exactly how you should understand it. In verse 21 he says, literally in Greek, you have heard that it was said, to the men of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders is liable to judgment. In verse 22 he says, and I say to you. Your translation probably says, but I say to you. But in Greek, the Greek word actually is a very subtle, weaker and. It's just, and I say to you. So he's saying, you've heard that it said, and I say to you this. So what he's doing is, and he'll do that pattern over and over. He does it in verse 27, he does it later on, many times. Jesus is saying, I know you've heard, literally heard, because in the synagogue on Saturdays, they've heard the law. They've heard the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. You've heard this before, and I know that's what you've heard. And I say to you means, and here's how to interpret it. Here's how to understand it. Here's how to apply it. It's not a strong, I know you've heard this, but I say, and there's, let's turn right all of a sudden. That's not what's going on. That's not how the Greek looks at all. Now, we know it was common, at least in later rabbinic material, those are Jewish scholars, Jewish specialists, the rabbis. The way they interpreted text was this. They would say, it says in the Torah, do not murder. Do not murder. What about when this happens and this happens? And they kind of speculate, what if this? And then a rabbi with those opinion in, another rabbi puts his opinion in, another rabbi, and so forth and so forth. Well, what happens if you're on the streets of Palestine and someone stops Rabbi Paul and says, Rabbi Paul, this happened. What do I do? What's the law? What would God want? And Rabbi Paul might do the same thing. He might cite the something in Leviticus or so forth, and then cite a bunch of scholars since then, a long tradition, and then say, and here's my view, and then he would probably say something like, Amen. Amen means may it be so, or therefore, or it's just an emphatic closure. In other words, that's my vote, my view. The point is, he makes his conclusion based on a whole host of other scholars or rabbis. Now, there might be different opinions on it, but he cites many of them and says, I agree with Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi David, Rabbi da-da-da-da-da. What is so striking is Jesus does not do that, ever. He never says, here's what the text is, here's what it means, because of all these other rabbis. He just says, here's what it means. Now, to us today, we might go, yeah, okay, so what? I hear preachers do that all the time. But in the ancient world, no one did that. At least we have no evidence that any Jew ever talked that way. No Jewish legal specialist ever did that. So Jesus assumes he has the authority directly and divinely to speak of exactly what the interpretation of the text is. Now this is very important because it demonstrates he has the authority to speak with divine prerogative, divine authority. And the crowd gets it because after he teaches, they say, who is this? He even teaches as one with authority. With authority. That is, this dude thinks he can just tell us the meaning and move on with life. But instead, that's what he does. In fact, in John's Gospel, instead of saying Amen at the end of it, he begins at the beginning. Amen, I tell you. Truly, I tell you. And this is what it happens. So Jesus almost certainly is offering an interpretation of the law that manifests its true intent without relying upon any other authority. Now, when he says, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subjected to judgment, of course, that comes from Exodus 20, 13, and Deuteronomy 5, 17. And it is murder, not killing. Killing is a different word in Hebrew and in Greek, and for some reason, it's a common misunderstanding, but based on several mistranslations. But it's do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I say to you, verse 22. Now I'm going to read this a little more woodenly from the Greek because I think it helps us understand it better. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Now pause it for a second. He's saying, I know you've heard, do not murder, and you'll be subjected to judgment. And judgment from Exodus 21, 12 to 14. The point is, if you murder someone, they can enact capital punishment upon you. That is, that's the consequence, is you can be killed too. Jesus is saying, and I'm saying to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. And whoever calls his brother Raka, will be liable to the council. That is the Sanhedrin. And whoever says More will be liable to the fire of hell. Now, couple points. Well, Raka is Aramaic for empty-headed or idiot. That's what Raka means. And More is a Greek word for fool or moron. And the point's the same. So if you call this person empty-headed, lughead, idiot, moron, fool, these are calling vicious names to a person. Now, you need to understand that in the Mediterranean world of which Jesus was a part, and certainly all through the Middle East, we might say, it was very shameful to call someone vicious names. Very shameful. And primarily because they believed that a person's name was like a window into their soul. It demonstrated their character. For example, my name is Dawid. It's actually a Hebrew word, Dawid. It means beloved. And so if my name were shameful, if my name were sinner or something, and you walked around, hey, sinner, if that's what my name was, it would say it'd be bad news. And so parents chose names wisely, and the assumption that they would grow into their name, as it were. So when you call a person a name, fool, moron, whatever, in the ancient world especially, and to this day it is true for many people, it assumed that you're doing something very vicious about their character. It's more than just name calling. It had authority with it. Now, second, Jews also assumed that the council, the Sanhedrin, almost certainly they believe this. That council made a decision. David sinned when he did blank, therefore he's a Gentile sinner, or therefore he needs to go get baptism. That is, their authority in the ancient Jewish mind was that they held the authority of God. So I don't think at all, and many scholars disagree with me on this one, but I don't find their argument compelling. I don't think we should see these are escalating judgments. Escalating, that is, if you say Raka, liable to the Sanhedrin, who calls moron, will be liable to fire of hell. I don't think this is building. I think the point is one major point, and that is a disciple cannot have such disdain toward his brother, and the word is brother or sister, such that it leads towards a disposition of rage, profanity, and shaming behavior. Say that again. A disciple cannot have such a disposition toward their brother or sister that it leads them to have a disposition of rage, profanity, and shaming behavior. That kind of behavior will be judged by God at judgment. Now, in polls today in the church, throughout the years, I've asked this question very often, and I've read this same study done many times before. What's your greatest struggle? Over and over again, dealing with anger issues makes the top of the list or one of the top 3 over and over. How do you deal with anger? Do you consider resentment and harboring anger a sin? If you don't, these texts will be terribly challenging for you, because Jesus is saying that in context, angry with his brother such that you call them these names and you're shameful. And I would argue easily this is a disposition of disdain or hatred. It doesn't mean you can never be angry. If you can never be angry, then I don't know what to do with texts where Jesus seems to be angry when he overturns the table and the temple and so forth. So I don't think Jesus means you can never ever be angry in life. Yes, we can. The issue is, do you get angry to the point of your brother and sister that you just are rageful at them, you're calling them names and you're trying to shame them and so forth? If that's the case, if that's you, number one is, do you admit it? Do you have a problem with that? And secondly, what are you going to do about it to get help? What will you do to get help? To be healed from that, to talk about those kinds of rage problems and to put those behind you. So I'm not saying this to shame you. I'm saying to be aware that this is our King. This is Jesus talking about how to deal with anger. There are appropriate ways to deal with anger, and there are inappropriate ways to deal with anger. And we don't want to make someone so riled up that they themselves get riled up to a sense of anger and hatred as well. And that's what the rest of this is all about. This section, this whole text, is really not about how to deal with anger. And that's how I have always heard it taught and preached. Not today. This text is not about that. There's only one text that comes close to that. That's what we just read. The remaining examples by Jesus are what to do after we've called people these names and done things to make them riled up and be mad at us. What do we do to them? Look at verse 23 to 24. I'm going to do a little synopsis from the Greek. If you bring your gift to the altar, leave your gift, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your gift. Now again, notice this example of reconciliation is not concerning what to do with our anger towards someone else. It's not about that. Rather, it's what to do when we have caused someone else to be angry toward us. He said, when you've caused your brother has something against you. Now, why is the person angry at us? He doesn't tell us. But in context, they're probably mad at us because we've been angry at them and shamed them, and we've called them vitriolic, shaming epithets, bad names, and so forth. Or we've made them riled up. Bringing a gift refers to the temple, of course, because you go to the temple, you bring a sacrificial gift, or you bring an offering. Examples are throughout Leviticus. Jesus is saying that when you go offer your gift to the temple to be reconciled with God, and you realize that you have your brother or sister is so mad or worked up at you because you said things or caused them to be very, very angry, you need to stop what you're doing, forget that gift, go be reconciled with your brother or sister, and then come back. Then come back. The idea, of course, is very powerful. Jews believe you're reconciled with God with the offering I'm giving. Jesus is saying, you're not reconciled with God no matter what you bring to the table if your brother or sister has something against you that you caused. Now, of course, there's probably some literal truth to this parable, but it's also somewhat hyperbolic because you don't go to Galilee all the way to Jerusalem and turn around and go all the way back down to, rather it's north to south. You don't go all the way back up to Galilee just because your brother or sister has something against you. The point is, that would be extreme. And that's the point. It should be extreme. We should take it so seriously that we don't come to a place of worship and prayer and so forth to church with something against our brother and sister. We can't do it. We can't do it. Here Jesus is saying that in order to be at peace with God, it is necessary to be at peace with the person that you have offended. We see very clearly here a close link between loving God and loving neighbor. Very close link. Now, of course, we can't make people reconcile to us. I like how Paul says in Romans 12:18, as much as it depends upon you, live at peace with all. As much as it depends upon you. We have healthy boundaries, and we can't make someone. All we can do is say, we can own what we've done, and we can say, I did that, and I'm very sorry what I've done. I admit it, I confess it, I own it, and I'm very sorry, and I hope our relationship can be reconciled. And it's up to the other person to get to a place of healing for the wounds. But we can't rush that. That's up to the other person. Then if they're a Christian, the other person who's been offended has to work toward forgiveness. That's the moral commandment of Jesus, to forgive people 70 times 7. So we work toward that. And forgiveness means, of course, to not want someone to be punished. We can have a wound that was caused to us from a pain that might take years to recover and heal from the wound. But we can forgive before our wound is fully healed. We can not want someone to be punished way before our wound is healed. And secondly, forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. They're not exactly the same. But in this context here, this example, he's saying you want to be reconciled as much as possible. But the assumption is the person you've offended in this text, the assumption Jesus is making is the person would welcome you back. They'd say, thank you for coming back, and our relationship is reconciled. But if they say, don't, forget you, I don't care, there's nothing you can do about that. This last example Jesus gives when he says, if you're going to court, someone's dragging you to court, he says, you need to make friends quickly with your adversary while on the way to court. Again, another example, not of how we deal with our anger, but how to deal with someone else who's taking you and me to court. That is, they're so riled up and angry, they're taking us to court. Probably a Jewish court more than a legal court, more than a secular court. Probably meaning they've done something and the Jewish elders would judge it. Of course, the adversary is adversary because something we've done. Now, this is another analogy to demonstrate this need to be reconciled. But this analogy Jesus gives about going to court emphasizes the urgency of being at peace. He says, quickly, before you get to court, you need to stop what's going on. Are you fast about reconciling? Do you own that you, and I know I can, do you own the fact that you can rile people up and say things to really push their buttons? If you do, confess that to God and help Him mature you in this area as a disciple of Jesus and move on. Is there someone in your life that has offered reconciliation that you've withheld from them? You withhold your forgiveness because you think it gives you power over them, or you'll show them, I'll never forgive you. If that's the case, in fact, you're in a prison and you're trapped. And you're always connected like an umbilical cord to the person who wronged you. Forgiveness and reconciliation frees us up. Now, let me say one quick last word. I know I'm over 15 minutes. Let me say a quick last word. To be forgiven and reconciled does not mean that you put yourself in harm's way. Some people have patterns of behavior. They are toxic, and they will hurt you. These kind of people hurt, whether they realize it or they don't realize it. We do not have to put ourselves in a position to be hurt by them just because we're seeking reconciliation. We do not have to put ourselves in a position to be hurt by them just because we're seeking reconciliation. Jesus did not run after the Pharisees. Please come back, please come back. Please come back and try to hurt me again, try to stone me again. He didn't do that. So people who want to be reconciled, pursue them. People who don't want to be reconciled, and that's the kind of people they are, let them be. Respect their boundaries and move on. God bless you. I know there's more. I hope you'll think this week about what to do when we have caused someone else to be so offended at us, and how we need to own what we've done and go after them to be reconciled. God bless you. I'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to today's Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you want more theological reflections, go to davidpendergrass.com. If you want me to come out to your church or to help your organization with consulting, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com.